Today we're going to begin Unit 2 of the course, which looks at the debate in the United States between workers' rights and economic freedom. In this unit, we'll look at questions regarding the power of businesses and corporations, and to what extent the federal government should regulate these industries. What rights do workers have? Who makes up the labor force? And how has technological innovation changed the nature of work in the United States? Well, as many of you know, on the 2016 campaign trail, Donald Trump won over working class voters by pledging to tear up or renegotiate the trade deals that sent millions of jobs overseas. Trump denounced manufacturers that moved jobs abroad and threatened to apply steep tariffs on countries that continued to misbehave. The media said Trump was selling doom and gloom and trying to return America to its past. But to his voters, Trump's promise to put America first and to bring jobs back was a hopeful message of the economic renewal that is critical to their future.
We're going to bring our jobs back. We're bringing them back to our country, and we're going to create millions of new jobs.
Much of the media and political establishment, and I'm sure many of you, couldn't believe that a Manhattan billionaire could win over working class voters. Trump did so by tapping into the idea of the forgotten man, working class Americans who felt ignored by their political leaders and left behind by globalism, and in particular free market policies. These free market policies were initially hailed as an important step in ensuring prosperity and broader freedoms throughout the world, and a wide body of research attests to the economic benefits in terms of reduced unemployment and increased economic growth. Yet the common criticism of globalism and free trade has been that the distribution of resources in free economies is inequitable, and that market liberalizing policies sacrifice social and political rights in the interest of economic competitiveness. Globalism is a subject we're going to return to later in the semester when we look at America's role in the world in the post-Cold War era, and also the growing split between red state and blue state America. But one of the key issues behind globalism and the debate about free market policies is a continuing tug of war between workers' rights and economic freedom in this country. President Trump, for example, has been widely critical of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, because it has caused many U.S. industries to move part of their production to Canada or Mexico, where the cost of labor is less and where employers may not have to collectively bargain with unions, provide health insurance, and provide a minimum wage on par with what the United States would require. This, in turn, led to a suppression of U.S. wages as workers had to choose between joining a union and thereby accepting lower pay and benefits or potentially losing their job as the factory they worked at moved across the border. Most economists and employers would tell you that the benefits of NAFTA far outweigh these drawbacks, as the agreement quadrupled the level of trade, lowered prices on goods for the average consumer, extremely important for oil prices, leading to economic growth, foreign investment, and expansion of the number of jobs, even if many of these jobs are low paying. But there's clearly debate of whether this is good for the United States. And part of the issue of workers' rights and economic freedom is the size of corporations and the power that they have on our politics and society as well. Take Amazon, for example. Many of you, as I do, use Amazon to purchase your books, household items, electronic devices, music, movies, and so on. Amazon, which was founded in 1994 as just an online bookstore, has surpassed Walmart as the most valuable retailer, and in 2018 reached $1 trillion in value, becoming only the second publicly traded U.S. company to do so after Apple. Now, what are the dangers of having a company of that size? How does it impact workers and consumers when one company has control over the market, like Amazon and Apple? Where are their products made? And how do they treat their workers? And how do these big companies impact Americans' economic freedom? This debate about workers' rights and economic freedom and the size and power of businesses and corporations is nothing new. It's just taken on a different form in recent years. So what happened in earlier periods of U.S. history? How can we contextualize this current moment by understanding different periods in American history where we witnessed these issues before? And a good starting point is the industrial period during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Just as the technological innovations, such as the internet, have changed the economy during our time, ingenuity drove the industrialization in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Between 1860 and 1930, the U.S. Patent Office granted 1.5 million patents for new inventions. It granted only 36,000 between 1790 and 1860. Inventions in electricity, internal combustion, and industrial chemistry often sprang from a marriage between technology and business organization. Thomas Edison, who became America's most celebrated inventor, opened an invention factory in New Jersey in 1876. There, his application of electricity to light, sound, and images, plus his system of delivering electric power, laid the foundation for how Americans live today. His most notable invention was the incandescent light bulb. Additionally, his Edison Electronic Light Company, founded in 1878, devised a system of power generation that provided electricity conveniently to manifold customers. Edison marketed his ideas with demonstrations of how electric lighting could transform night into day, brightening homes, offices, and places like Coney Island. Electricity changed the way Americans lived and worked, much as the internet did in the late 20th century, but it took many people time to adjust to the new invention.
Mama, I'm sorry, no one told me you were here.
Oh, dear, such a glare. I feel as if I were on stage at the Gaiety.
We're used to it. I do wish you'd let me install it in the Dower House. It's very convenient. The man who manages the generator could look after yours as well.
No, I couldn't have electricity in the house. I wouldn't sleep a wink. All those vapours seeping about.
Even Cora won't have it in the bedroom. She did wonder about the kitchens, but I couldn't see the point.
Other entrepreneurs further adapted to electricity. Granville Woods, an Ohio engineer, patented 35 devices vital to electronics and communications. Financiers Henry Villard and J.P. Morgan bought patents and merged equipment manufacturing companies into the General Electric Company, including research laboratories. Meanwhile, leading visionary manufacturer Henry Ford adapted the internal combustion engine, initially developed in Germany, to propel a vehicle. In 1908, Ford unveiled his Model T, which could travel hundreds of miles without servicing and was cheap enough to be affordable to most working Americans. In the ensuing 20 years, Americans bought Model T vehicles by the millions. The demand for Model Ts had a major impact on the economy. Millions of cars required millions of pounds of steel, glass, rubber, petroleum, and other material. Millions of jobs in coal and iron ore mining, oil refining, and rubber manufacturing, steel making, and machine tooling, road construction, and service stations came to depend on automobile manufacturing. By 1914, the Ford Motor Company outside of Detroit was producing about 250,000 cars per year. Ford also benefited from new scientific management of the factory floor. His engineers adopted the theories of Frederick Winslow Taylor, who examined every human task and mechanical movement involved in the production process. In his book, The Principles of Scientific Management, Taylor concluded that companies could best reduce costs and increase profits by applying studies of how quickly the various kinds of work ought to be done. Adopting Taylorism wholeheartedly, the Ford Motor Company broke down automobile manufacturing into a series of simple, sequential tasks. Each worker performed only one task, adding a carburetor to an engine, inserting a windshield, mounting tires onto wheels, etc. Then, in 1913, Ford engineers introduced the first moving assembly line, a continuously moving conveyor belt that carried cars in production through each workstation. This innovation eliminated time previously wasted in transporting car parts or partially built cars by crane or truck from one work area to another. It also limited the time available to workers to perform their assigned tasks. Indeed, machines and new management techniques simply altered everyday life. Telephones and typewriters made face-to-face communications less important and facilitated correspondence. Electric sewing machines facilitated mass-produced clothing. Refrigeration enabled preservation and shipment of fresh meat, produce, and dairy products. Canning preserved foods such as tomatoes, fish, and milk that otherwise would have spoiled easily. New technology even affected personal hygiene. Flush toilets, invented in England, reached American shores in the 1880s. Together, developments in communications, clothing, food, and plumbing contributed to the democratization of convenience via mass production. The industrialization in the United States revolutionized the world economy. It brought large-scale commercial agriculture to many parts of the globe and prompted millions of migrants, both skilled workers and displaced peasants, to cross continents and oceans in search of jobs. Industrialization also created a production glut. The immense scale of agriculture and manufacturing caused a long era of deflation when prices dropped worldwide. Falling prices normally signal low demand for goods and services, and thus stagnation. In England, a mature industrial power of the late 19th century did bring economic decline, but in the United States, production expanded. Between 1877 and 1900, Americans' average real income increased from $388 to $573 per capita. Technological and business efficiencies allowed American firms to grow, invest in new equipment, and earn profits even as prices for their products fell. Growth depended, in turn, on America's large and growing population, expansion into the West, and an integrated national marketplace. In many fields, large corporations became the dominant form of business. Corporations proved the best instruments for industrial expansion. These were companies that raised capital by selling shares to stockholders who shared profits without personal risk, because laws limited their liability for company debts to the amount of their investments. Firms such as General Electric and the American Tobacco Corporation won judicial safeguards in 1888 when the Supreme Court declared that corporations, like individuals, are protected by laws preventing government from depriving them of property rights without due process of law. During the 1880s, corporations in the same industry made agreements called pools to share markets and profits. Many grew into big and powerful businesses. The story of Andrew Carnegie is perhaps the best illustration of the rise of big business. Carnegie exemplified American success. Arriving from Scotland as a poor 12-year-old in 1848, Carnegie found work as an errand boy for the Pennsylvania Railroad and rapidly scaled the managerial ladder. In 1865, he struck out on his own as an iron manufacturer, selling to friends in the railroad business. Encouraged by Republican tariffs to enter the steel industry, he soon built a massive steel mill outside Pittsburgh, where a state-of-the-art Bessemer converter made steel refining dramatically more efficient. With Carnegie leading the way, steel became a major U.S. industry, reaching an annual production of 10 million metric tons by 1900, almost as much as the combined output of the world's other top producers, Germany and Britain. At first, skilled workers at Carnegie's mill in Homestead, Pennsylvania earned good wages. They had a strong union, and Carnegie affirmed workers' right to organize. But Carnegie, confident that the new machinery enabled him to replace many skilled laborers, eventually decided that collective bargaining, joining a union, was too expensive. In the summer of 1892, he withdrew to his estate in Scotland, leaving his partner, Henry Clay Frick, in command. A former coal magnate and veteran foe of labor, Frick was well qualified to do the dirty work. He announced that after July 1, members of the Iron and Steel Workers Union would be locked out of Homestead Mill. If they wanted to return to work, they would have to abandon the union and sign new individual contracts. Frick fortified the mill and prepared to hire replacement workers. The battle was on. At dawn on July 6th, dozens of private armed guards from the Pinkerton Detective Agency, hired by Carnegie to defend the plant, arrived ready for battle. Locked-out workers opened fire, starting a gunfight that left 7 workers and 3 Pinkertons dead. Frick appealed to Pennsylvania's governor, who sent a state militia to arrest labor leaders on charges of riot and murder. Most of the locked-out workers lost their jobs. The union was dead. As the Homestead lockout showed, industrialization was a controversial and often bloody process. During the half-century after the Civil War, more and more Americans worked not as independent farmers or artisans, but as employees of large corporations. Conditions of work changed for people of all economic classes. Drawn by the dynamic economy, immigrants arrived from around the globe. These transformations provoked working people, including farmers as well as industrial workers, to organize and defend their interests. Carnegie was hardly alone in the uses of ruthless business tactics. John D. Rockefeller, the king of petroleum, had strong nerves, a sharp eye for able partners, and a genius for finance. He went into the kerosene business and borrowed heavily to expand. Within a few years, his firm, Standard Oil of Ohio, was Cleveland's leading refinery. Like Carnegie, Rockefeller succeeded through vertical integration to control production and sales all the way from the oil well to the kerosene lamp. He took a big stake in the oil fields, added pipelines, and developed a vast distribution network. Rockefeller allied with railroad executives who, like him, hated the oil market's boom and bust cycles. What they wanted was predictable, high-volume traffic, and they offered Rockefeller secret rebates that gave him a leg up on competitors. Rockefeller also pioneered a strategy called horizontal integration. After driving competitors to the brink of failure through predatory pricing, he invited them to merge their local companies into his conglomerate. Most agreed, often because they had no choice. Through such mergers, Standard Oil wrested control of 95% of the nation's oil refining capacity by the 1880s. In 1882, Rockefeller's lawyers created a new legal form, the trust. It organized a small group of associates, the board of trustees, to hold stock from a group of combined firms, managing them as a single entity. Rockefeller soon invested in Mexican oil fields and competed in markets against Russian and Middle Eastern producers. Other companies followed Rockefeller's lead, creating trusts to produce such products as linseed oil, sugar, and salt. Many expanded sales and production overseas. J.P. Morgan set out to conquer the financial worker, and he did. After the Civil War, he set out to corner the nation's financial markets. When the Panic of 1873 rocked the nation's economy, Morgan protected himself wisely and emerged in the aftermath as the king of American finance. In 1879, Morgan established his reputation for financial dealings when he unloaded stock in the New York Central Railroad for $25 million on behalf of William H. Vanderbilt. The sales took place in London and did not depress the share values in New York. Morgan made $3 million for the firm. Morgan was active in creating some of the largest American corporations. He merged Thomas Edison's electrical works with others to form General Electric. He joined the steel business of Andrew Carnegie with others to form the world's first billion-dollar corporation, United States Steel. It became the general practice to have Morgan representatives on boards of companies, giving Morgan an influence over corporations with value out of all proportion to its equity, to his equity interest. Between the demise of the Second Bank of the United States and the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, there was no formal central bank in America. After the Civil War, the House of Morgan performed this role in emergency situations. In 1871, J.P. Morgan converted the payroll for the entire U.S. Army when a deadlocked Congress was unable to pass the necessary legislation. In 1895, he obtained $65 million in gold so that the United States government could continue to redeem currency for the precious metal. Morgan gained his greatest fame in the Panic of 1907, when in concert with other Wall Street financiers, he stopped the run on the banks by determining which were sound and allowing those who were to reopen with his backing. While this was a great service to the nation, it revealed the enormous influence that one man had in the U.S. economy. The repercussions of this included an investigation by Congress and, in turn, the establishment of the Federal Reserve. Morgan's actions marked a shift in thinking among American industrialists. He proved that it was not necessary to be a builder to be successful. Smart investment and efficient consolidation could yield massive profits. Young entrepreneurs shifted their goals to banking in the hopes of mirroring Morgan's success. Despite their success, many Americans viewed these wealthy tycoons as robber barons for gaining their vast fortunes either at the expense of their factory workers or by methods that were considered unscrupulous even back then, such as insider trading, which had yet to be outlawed. But these barons defended their actions on grounds of entrepreneurial innovation and efficiency, and that their enterprises enabled the United States to leap ahead of Britain and others as an industrial power. Business leaders also justified their actions by invoking social Darwinism. This philosophy loosely grafted Charles Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest onto laissez-faire, the doctrine that government should not interfere in private economic matters. Social Darwinists reasoned that in a free market economy, wealth would naturally flow to those most capable of creating it. Denouncing efforts to legislate maximum working hours or factory conditions as interference, corporate leaders nonetheless lobbied for public subsidies and tax relief to encourage business growth. By 1913, American manufacturing output equaled that of the next three industrial nations combined: Germany, Britain, and France. And for many observers, it was the business tycoons like Carnegie, Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan who helped make this happen and created wealth for all Americans. Many of the barons also professed a gospel of stewardship, as Carnegie, Rockefeller, and others gave away much of their wealth to educational and philanthropic institutions. As Carnegie explained, it was far better in his view to squeeze money from his workers' paychecks, aggregate it, and give back to the community in the form of public libraries and concert halls. By the time he died in 1919, Carnegie had given away more than 90% of his fortune, over $350 million, equivalent to $4.8 billion in inflation-adjusted money, to hundreds of causes. He built more than 2,800 public libraries, founded what is now Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, one of the world's leading research universities, and spent millions constructing New York's Carnegie Hall and other concert venues. Rockefeller's donations and foundations helped build the University of Chicago, funded medical programs that led to vaccines for meningitis, yellow fever, and other diseases, and built major schools of public health at Johns Hopkins and Harvard. Other large-scale philanthropists, including automaker Henry Ford, who created America's largest charitable foundation, and industrialist John Paul Getty, who set up the wealthiest art institution in the world. Despite their philanthropy, not everyone agreed with their methods, and the vast majority of Americans did not share in the wealth of these tycoons. Working conditions remained poor and unsafe. Cities were crowded and unsanitary. Politics became extremely corrupt. In part 2 of this lecture, we'll examine the problems created by industrialism and the rise of big business, and discuss why there was a need for a progressive movement to emerge to cure these societal problems.